Hey guys, tonight we travel back through incense-filled corridors and the delicate rustle of silk robes to a world where sleep was state business and dreams could alter the fate of an entire empire. You're about to be led into the heart of ancient China, not through gates or scrolls, but through the soft, flickering portal of the subconscious. Imagine yourself in the quiet of a candlelit chamber in the Forbidden City, where even the emperor's pillow carries political weight. It's a world where every dream is watched, weighed, and whispered about before sunrise. You probably won't survive this court if your dreams are too weird because someone is listening and interpreting and possibly reporting it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle past guards holding moon-shaped lanterns, your breath, forming little clouds in the cold corridor. Somewhere behind embroidered screens, the Son of Heaven is fast asleep. Or trying to be. Because in this palace, a dream is never just a dream. It's a message maybe from ancestors, maybe from heaven, or maybe from a rival plotting rebellion by candlelight. The Chinese emperors from the Warring States period through the mighty Han and dazzling Tang dynasties considered dreams to be part of the cosmic web threads woven by divine will, ancestral spirits, and the shifting balance of yin and yang. You don't just wake up, stretch, and forget. No. You report to scribes, to astrologers, sometimes to an entire bureau dedicated to analyzing your sleep. And if you're the emperor, the stakes are even higher. The dreams of rulers weren't private. They were studied like meteorological data or grain yields. A dragon appearing in mist might signal good fortune or a military campaign. A dream of weeping jade could foreshadow death. If the emperor dreamed of a white fox circling his throne, cancel all appointments, summon the interpreters. The word for dream in classical Chinese Ming was more than sleep talk. It was a signal, a portal, and often a trap. Let's say you're a newly appointed imperial servant. You've just been given the honor or curse of sleeping in a chamber adjacent to the emperor's. You're told to listen, just listen. Record anything he mutters in his sleep, then pass it to the dream office. Yes, there was often an actual dream office, not a metaphor, a staffed division. And it wasn't just to soothe the emperor's nerves. Dream interpretation in ancient China was baked into the state philosophy. From the moment the mandate of heaven was coined, a divine justification for rule dreams became evidence, support, or warning. If an emperor dreamed of flood waters, and that week a river overflowed, everyone paid attention. Too many of these, and you might hear mutterings that heaven had withdrawn its blessing. This wasn't superstition, it was political calculus dressed in poetry. The earliest known dream records in Chinese history go back to texts like the Zhuozhuan, dating to the 4th century BCE. It includes over 20 detailed dreams, with interpretations many tied to military outcomes or dynastic changes. One duke dreams of eating a bear paw. The interpreters declare it a warning of betrayal. He laughs it off. Days later, he's poisoned. Now you may think, okay, so ancient people were poetic and paranoid. But here's where it gets oddly bureaucratic. In the Han Dynasty under Emperor Wu, Dreams became so vital that imperial astrologers began cross-referencing dreams with astronomical alignments. You might get summoned not just by a priest or a philosopher, but by a man holding a compass, a bamboo calendar, and a half-burned stick of incense. His job to determine if your dream of a red horse matched the celestial movements of Jupiter and whether it meant a rebellion in the West. Historians still argue whether this dream obsession was mostly theater to maintain power, or whether emperors genuinely feared divine punishment for ignoring their visions. Some say it was a control tactic. Interpret your dreams wisely, and you reaffirm your destiny. Others believe these rulers really did sweat through silk sheets, terrified of what they'd seen behind closed eyes. And here's a funny bit. Some emperors would try to plant good dreams. Before bed, they'd drink herbal infusions, said to attract visions of auspicious animals or wise ancestors. Sleep became a form of statecraft. Goose feather pillows were fluffed just so. The scent of magnolia was wafted in. Incantations whispered, all to engineer a better message from the beyond. But it wasn't all dragons and jade lotuses. One minor warlord, lost to time but immortalized in a late Han record, reportedly dreamed of a chicken laying coins in a basket. His dream interpreter told him it meant that taxes would overflow from the peasants soon. Delighted, he tripled tax expectations. The result, an uprising. The warlord was captured and paraded through town, wearing, no joke, a chicken hat. The absurdity didn't stop dream interpreters from gaining real clout. Some had the emperor's ear more than his ministers. Others were hated, mocked, even assassinated, because if you told the emperor his dream meant doom, you'd better be right, or dead. You pass under another archway, now this one engraved with images of cranes and phoenixes, symbols of good fortune and transformation. The palace is silent, but your thoughts are loud. Who decides what dreams mean and who watches the watchers? The candle flickers. You feel it in your bones, this strange mix of poetry and paranoia, of cosmic ritual and state surveillance. Welcome to ancient China. You're deeper in the palace now, tracing your steps over polished stone floors, worn smooth by generations of anxious courtiers. The doors you pass are painted vermilion and trimmed with golden studs, ornate symbols of power, but the real unease lies behind them. Because tonight, the emperor dreams. And sometimes those dreams are terrifying. You slip into a side corridor just as a eunuch hurries past, carrying a lacquered box of jade sleep charms. He doesn't look up. No one does, really. The air is thick with incense and tension. It's the kind of night when heaven seems a little too close. You can feel it pressing on the roof tiles. Now, emperors had many fears: rebellion, assassination, drought, famine. But perhaps no fear ran deeper than the fear of being abandoned by heaven. The belief was simple but severe. If heaven no longer favored you, you'd see signs: crooked rainbows, pale suns, comets. And sometimes, perhaps most disturbingly, dreams. You might think nightmares are a private thing, a quirk of your own restless brain. But for an emperor of ancient China, a nightmare could destabilize the court. Some of the earliest imperial records, like those of the Han dynasty, include detailed accounts of dreams that sent shock waves through the bureaucracy. Take the case of Emperor Wen of Han. One spring night he dreamed of a vast black horse drowning in a river of fire. The dream was reported at dawn. His ministers panicked. Within hours, rituals were conducted to appease the spirits. Within days, reforms were proposed. One nightmare and half the civil code might get rewritten. The emperor, wrapped in layers of brocade and protocol, was still at heart a man, but one whose dreams could tip the scales of fate. You crouch in the shadows, now peeking into a room where dream scribes sit waiting. Their writing brushes are still dry, but their minds are bracing. One will record the emperor's spoken words. Another will track his expressions as he sleeps. Still another consults a book of omens. These men are trained not just in language, but in celestial calendars, herbal lore, and the most important art of all, not getting executed when the interpretation displeases His Majesty. It's a delicate dance, after all. Tell the emperor his dream is lucky and you might be rewarded. Say it foretells doom and you'd better have 3 pages of scholarly backup or a good hiding place. During the Eastern hand dream, interpreters began wearing color-coded robes depending on the elemental alignment of the emperor's latest visions. Red for fire, black for water, white for metal. A vivid theatrical touch, but also deadly serious. Get the element wrong, and it could suggest you misunderstood the dream, or worse, disrespected the cosmic order. And if that weren't enough, remember that dreams weren't static. They evolved with the dynasty. In the early Tang era, for example, Emperor Taizong had a particularly eerie vision of being dragged underwater by a red-haired spirit, the interpretation a vengeful general he had executed. Taizong, normally considered a pragmatic ruler, was said to have spent weeks offering incense at Buddhist temples and personally commissioned a shrine to appease the general's ghost. Historians still argue whether Taizong genuinely feared the supernatural or simply used the dream to justify more religious spending. But the effect was real. Officials trembled. Armies paused. Dreams weren't just bedtime stories. They were political weather. Now let's get even more personal. Some emperors reportedly kept dream diaries, though they were often written by others since few emperors handled ink themselves. These diaries cataloged everything from peaceful flying over plum orchards to screaming chases through forests of blood-red bamboo. Pages might be sealed and hidden. Others read aloud at court became public mandates. Can you imagine having your worst nightmare declared a national emergency? There's a whispered story, half recorded, half rumor, of an emperor who dreamed repeatedly of drowning in golden syrup. After 3 such dreams, he outlawed honey. Beekeeping was criminalized. Monks caught with honeycombs were fined. Did the syrup symbolize indulgence, betrayal, indigestion? We'll never know. But the fear was real enough to sweeten no one's tea for a decade. It wasn't just interpretation, it was anticipation. Advisors began trying to influence imperial dreams. In certain courts, musicians were assigned to play dream music, soft Guqin melodies, or haunting flutes before the emperor slept. Scented pillows infused with mugwort or chrysanthemum were believed to steer visions toward clarity. One record even suggests a court magician buried lucky jade under the emperor's bed, hoping it would attract dreams of victory before a military campaign. And if none of that worked, well, you could always blame someone else. Nightmares were dangerous not just to the emperor's mind, but to those around him. If His Majesty dreamed of betrayal, heads might roll. Dream of a snake coiling around a scroll. It might mean the Minister of Rights is plotting something, or perhaps your cousin is about to be exiled. Better not have a snake tattoo. One young concubine favored by the emperor dreamed of a black-robed man stealing the sun. She told the emperor, thinking it poetic. Within the week, her family was investigated, and her uncle, an outspoken magistrate, was found guilty of subverting the light of the realm. He died in prison. She was promoted. Coincidence or strategic dreaming? It's hard to say. But in this world, sleep isn't restful. It's strategic. You reach another hallway now lined with portraits of past emperors. Their eyes seem to follow you, calm, distant, haunted. Perhaps they're still dreaming even centuries later. One carries a faint smile, as though he knew his dream would be misinterpreted. Another looks stern, his scroll clenched tight. Maybe he tried to resist the pull of dream logic. Maybe he failed. So tonight, as the emperor turns restlessly in bed, dreaming of crane's coins or crimson rain, remember the most powerful man in the world is also the most vulnerable. Asleep, he is exposed not to assassins or invaders, but to his own mind. And everyone else is watching. The air shifts as you move deeper into the inner sanctum, where silken drapes divide rooms and shadows settle like court officials waiting for a signal. Here, behind carved screens and perfumed corridors, you find something surprisingly modern. A bureaucratic structure designed entirely around dreams. Yes, in a world filled with warlords, famine, and shifting dynasties, someone still found time to invent the dream department. You blink because it feels almost ridiculous, but it's real. You're standing outside the Dream Interpretation Bureau, or at least one of its many historical equivalents. Various dynasties, it went by different names, often folded into the Office of Celestial Signs or the Bureau of Astrology. But don't let the fancy celestial branding fool you. These were full-time government jobs, salaried ranks, reporting structures, promotions, demotions, and of course the occasional beheading for interpretive misconduct. Dream interpretation had infrastructure. By the Tang Dynasty, the bureaucracy had expanded to include interpreters, omens, specialists, and scribes who collated dream data alongside astronomical observations. If the emperor dreamed of red clouds and a new star appeared in the east that same week, that got logged. If he dreamed of snakes and the rice harvest failed, also logged. Eventually a pattern might be declared, an edict might follow, heads might roll. The system ran like a night shift think tank. And honestly, you probably wouldn't be allowed to bring snacks. You duck into a side room and find a dimly lit archive. Bamboo slips are stacked like firewood, each inscribed with delicate characters. Some are brittle with age, others freshly inked. These are royal dreams. Filed, cataloged, analyzed. Most follow a loose format. In the third watch of the night, His Majesty saw a deer made of mist approach from the north, and then the interpretation which could run longer than the dream itself. And no, this wasn't a fringe activity. It was embedded in policy. Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, known for his interest in mysticism, once delayed a tax reform because of a troubling series of dreams involving fish leaping from stone bowls. He asked 5 separate interpreters for opinions. They gave 5 different answers. He chose the one that said delay is wise. Historians still argue whether he truly believed the dream or simply wanted a political excuse. But what matters is the dreams were part of the state dialogue. An emperor didn't just decree and command. He slept and then consulted his sleep. In some palaces, interpreters had their own rooms. In others, they were summoned like sorcerers, cloaked, secretive, half-feared. You can almost see one now, a man with ink-stained fingers and heavy eyes, stepping into the throne room at dawn, holding a scroll that might change everything. He doesn't speak first. He waits. If he looks too eager, he's sycophantic, too hesitant, and he might be hiding bad news. It's like performance art mixed with metaphysics. One particularly meticulous emperor in the Song dynasty even introduced a three-tiered dream evaluation process. First, the literal possibility was reviewed. Could the dream reflect an overheard conversation or a recent event? Second, the symbolic interpretation was debated. Animal meanings, color, significance, dream geography. And finally, a moral implication was explored. Did the dream reflect the emperor's conduct desires or divine worthiness? Imagine running your own HR reviews like that. Johnson. Your nightmare about being chased by flaming ducks suggests you're insecure about quarterly earnings. But in all seriousness, the interpretations mattered. Careers rose and fell by how well one read the unconscious mind of the emperor. A dream, interpreted as a sign of great harvest, could make an astrologer's name. Misreading a nightmare as merely indigestion could cost a courtier his title. It was so codified that dream lexicons were compiled. These were scrolls or later bound volumes listing dream symbols and their standard meanings. Much like a dream dictionary you might find in a modern bookstore, except these ones had the power to send armies to war. A white bird, peaceful transition. A broken sword, military betrayal. A cloud shaped like a turtle. Depends on which dynasty you're in, and whether it's facing the emperor or fleeing from him. One court favorite, a scholar named Zhang Jie, reportedly kept over 1,000 dream cases in his private library. He wasn't just interpreting, he was training. His apprentices had to memorize dozens of associations and be able to cross-reference them with seasonal omens, recent rainfall, and astrological positions. Basically, dream analysis was part Jungian therapy, part weather forecast, part PR spin, and yet for all the structure, uncertainty always lurked. There were never clear answers. The emperor might dream of a shadow falling across a field of gold. One interpreter says it means rebellion. Another says it means the emperor is blessed with humility. A third says the gold isn't literal. It refers to someone named Jin Gold in Chinese, and they should be promoted. Now imagine being the emperor. What do you want it to mean? And more importantly, what happens when your interpretation clashes with everyone else's? You pass by a doorway carved with cloud motifs, symbol of transformation, a favorite among dream scholars. Inside, a young boy scribes today's dream log while his master dictates. They're speaking softly, but you catch a few words. Crimson peach tree, 8 cranes, river flowing backwards. The apprentice frowns. He doesn't yet know if this is a good omen or a really, really bad one. And here's the twist: you couldn't fake your way through this job. You had to be subtle, too optimistic, and you seemed like a flatterer. Too grim, and you might infect the emperor's mood. You had to walk a razor-thin line of nuance. Some interpreters developed reputations not unlike modern celebrities. One was known for poetic readings that soothed even the most terrifying dreams. Another was infamous for predicting disaster so frequently that he was nicknamed the Weeper. Strangely enough, both kept their jobs for years, proof that the emperor didn't want truth or comfort. He wanted options. By the time you return to the hallway, you realize this whole structured dream. Interpreters' scrolls courts of consultation was built on something utterly invisible. Thoughts, symbols, echoes of fears and hopes that came in sleep. And yet here in the very heart of the empire, it had all the weight of stone. You glance back at the flickering lamps and whisper, who's really in charge here? The dreamer or the interpreter? You follow the sound of brush strokes, now faint as a whisper against the hush of dawn. It leads you down a narrow corridor into a low-ceilinged chamber where light from an oil lamp casts long, delicate shadows. A scribe sits cross-legged at a lacquered desk, hunched over strips of bamboo. He dips his brush again, then pauses, not because he's tired, but because what he's about to write might shape tomorrow's imperial decree. He's recording the emperor's dream. And in this moment you realize something strange for a civilization that celebrated silence and stillness. The act of transcribing a dream is a frenzy of meaning beneath calm hands. Each stroke matters. Each pause a moment of interpretation. Because every word you ink might ripple outward through ministers, generals, maybe even the heavens themselves. The bamboo slip in front of him isn't for poetry. It's not a confession. It's evidence. A royal dream, fresh from the emperor's lips at sunrise, is being carefully committed to record in formal classical Chinese. The structure is almost ritualistic date time of dream description, and if known, the emotional state of the emperor before sleeping. Even whether he had wine or a medicinal tonic beforehand is noted. Because dreams don't just fall from the sky. They come from bodies, from meals, from memories, and if you're in the palace, from politics. This system of dream logging was more than record keeping. It was a blend of mysticism and audit. If the emperor dreamed of a thunderstorm, and then real thunder cracked the skies later that week, that would be noted. If he dreamed of a wolf and a courtier with the surname Lang, which means wolf in Chinese, made a mistake, suddenly connections spark, and soon Lang is escorted out in silence. These logs became part of the imperial archive. Some were compiled into scrolls or even full volumes, especially under dream-hungry emperors like Wu of Liang, who ruled in the 6th century. He was said to keep 2 scribes on rotating shifts beside his bed, ready to leap into transcription duty at the slightest mumble. One legend says that during a summer thunderstorm, Wu of Liang sat up and muttered, "The turtle floats backwards through the lotus." The scribes froze. Was he talking in his sleep or reciting a prophecy? They recorded it anyway. Days later, his chief general fell ill. Weeks later, a battle was lost in the south. The dream was reinterpreted. The turtle was the general. The lotus was the homeland. And floating backward, well, that one explained itself. Historians still argue whether these logs reflect cause and effect thinking or just retroactive meaning making. But either way, people believed them. You peer closer at the scribe's work. The bamboo slips are tied with silk thread, the characters pressed tightly together. No room for flourish. Just fact. And yet the act feels almost holy. This isn't just administration, it's sacred bureaucracy. You spot a tool nearby, a narrow wooden case filled with ink blocks, scented faintly with pine and cloves. Dream ink. Some believed that the ink used to transcribe dreams should be made from plants that promoted clarity, wisteria, bark, lotus seeds, powdered pearl. Whether it made a difference, debatable. But imagine trying to sleep, knowing even your dreams would be written in semi-precious paste. In wealthier dynasties, dreams weren't just recorded, they were decorated. Special scrolls painted with watercolor images of the dreams were sometimes gifted to the emperor as a birthday or New Year tribute. If he dreamed of cranes, you might paint a scroll with 9 ivory cranes flying over pine trees. Just don't get the direction wrong. North meant death. South, rebirth. The detail goes further. You pass a young servant arranging pillow books, small dream dictionaries stored at the foot of the emperor's bed. These contained lists of symbols, their traditional meanings, and associated rituals. Think of them like a medieval help guide. If you dream of a plum tree light incense on the second night after full moon, it's half instruction manual, half spiritual weather forecast. And sometimes the dream itself didn't matter as much as who had it. Enter the world of dream. Surrogate's a weird little corner of palace life where astrologers or monks claimed to dream on behalf of the emperor. They fasted, meditated, and slept in special shrines, believing their dreams would channel divine messages for the ruler. If that sounds like an ancient version of remote login, well, it kind of was, and this wasn't fringe. Emperor Jing of Han was so anxious about receiving impure dreams that he routinely asked Buddhist monks to enter trances and report back what they saw. One monk claimed he dreamed of a flaming gate over the Yellow River. Interpreted as a sign of danger, the emperor delayed crossing the river during a planned campaign. Days later, a flash flood hit. Coincidence or divine connection depends on whom you ask. But that monk got a promotion. Still, not all dreams were so cinematic. Many logs are painfully mundane. His Majesty dreamed of eating peaches. His Majesty saw a woman in blue robes weeping. His Majesty heard the sound of drums in a fog. But even the simple ones weren't dismissed. A peach might signal renewal or lust. A weeping woman might represent the suffering of the people. Fog, political confusion. The point wasn't to solve the dream, it was to wrestle with it, to let it ripple outward, unsettling or confirming what people already feared. You step back from the scribe's table now. He's just finished binding a new slip. The characters gleam faintly in the lamplight. It reads, Night Watch, 2nd hour. His Majesty dreamt he walked alone among stone lions who whispered without mouths. He felt cold. He awoke angry. And just like that, the court shifts. Tomorrow's ministers will read this and wonder, am I the lion or am I the stone you leave the scribe's chamber behind, slipping once more into the palace corridors? This time you follow a different scent. Not incense or ink, but something more ethereal. A mix of damp earth and wind-blown pine. The scent of another world. Because while Confucians preferred the ordered logic of moral character, and scribes worked through symbols like accountants with calligraphy brushes, there was a different current of belief that tugged at the edges of the imperial mind. You're walking toward a Taoist sanctuary now. Here dreams weren't just symbolic, they were gateways. Thin places where the waking world and the immortal realm overlapped like silk laid over rice paper. You push aside a curtain and step into a chamber lit by soft green light from glazed windows. The walls are painted with spirals, cloud stars. A monk in gray robes sits silently before a bronze incense burner shaped like a crane. He doesn't look up, but you know he's listening to you maybe, or to something much farther away. Taoist philosophy treats the world as a constantly shifting flow of energy or ki. Dreams in this view were not echoes or memories. They were explorations, projections, sometimes even visitations. The dreamer didn't simply see things, they went places. Dream manuals from the 3rd to 6th centuries describe entire landscapes, known only through dreams, jade islands, crimson oceans, staircases that climb into white voids. One famous Taoist master, Ge Hong, claimed that in dreams a person's spirit could exit the body and travel among the stars. Not metaphorically, literally. In fact, he even laid out methods for preparing the body for such travel, eating light-burning wormwood, facing north while sleeping. Your average dream interpreter saw symbols, but a Taoist saw geography. And if your dream took you to a familiar place, say the legendary Kunlun mountain well, then you'd better wake up and take notes. Because that wasn't your brain talking. That was the universe letting you in on a secret. You sit now across from the monk. He offers you a cup of warm chrysanthemum tea. No words pass between you. Instead, he opens a small lacquered box. Inside, dream tokens. Smooth jade discs carved with patterns that resemble constellations. These were placed beneath pillows or worn as pendants intended to guide the soul's travel while the body rested. And this wasn't some back alley superstition. Emperors sought out Taoist sages not just for immortality potions, but for dream readings. In fact, some emperors believed that their dreams were glimpses of their past lives. Entire reigns were shaped by the belief that you were once this and will be again that. Emperor Wudi of the Han Dynasty, for instance, was obsessed with dreams that showed him as a tiger prowling through white grasslands. He believed it was a signal from his previous incarnation, possibly a mountain god, and accordingly began campaigns in the West, citing divine animal authority. Did it work? Well, his generals weren't thrilled, but the borders expanded. And that's the kind of result a dream interpreter could build a career on. Historians still debate whether these dreams were dreams at all, or just carefully crafted stories whispered through the right mouths to justify bold moves. But the Taoist logic held firm. A ruler in tune with the dream world was a ruler in tune with the Tao, the cosmic flow. One particularly bizarre practice involved dream incubation shrines. You'd enter a sacred space, fast recite incantations, and sleep on a specific mat or under a carved canopy designed to attract a specific kind of dream. Want to meet your ancestor? Face west. Want insight into a political decision? Face east. One emperor even commissioned a dream shrine shaped like a spiral, believing it would pull in celestial memory. Of course, there's a risk in all this. If dreams can transport, you can lead your spirit away. What happens if it doesn't come back? A chilling tale passed down in Taoist texts tells of a minister who dreamed for 7 nights in a row that he was living the life of a fisherman in a distant village. Each night he awoke more confused. On the 8th day, he failed to wake at all. His body still breathed, but his mind never returned. The emperor ordered monks to retrieve him. 3 weeks later, he opened his eyes and wept, not out of fear, but because he said the fisherman's life was better. You try not to dwell on that. The monk before you finally speaks. A dream is not a mirror. It's a doorway. And perhaps that's what scared emperors most. Because mirrors show you what is. But doorways lead you somewhere. Maybe into the truth, maybe into madness. Taoist thinkers taught that within dreams the dreamer encountered not just strange images, but real entities, immortals, spirits. Sometimes even the spirit of the empire itself. One tale describes an emperor who dreamt he was a tortoise carrying a great bronze palace on his back. When he awoke, his ministers interpreted it as a call to build new temples. But the Taoist priest at court disagreed. He whispered that the tortoise was the emperor and the palace his burden. The dream was a warning, not a command. And for once, the emperor listened. You leave the chamber, but the smell of herbs and old wood clings to your robe. The dream tokens rattle faintly in their box. The monk bows, and behind him a carved screen flickers with strange light. For a moment you wonder if you have been dreaming this whole time, if this palace is the real world or just another layer of mist. But no matter, because here in the courts of kings and sages, dreams are not illusions, they're instructions, and you're just beginning to read them. The corridor narrows again, and this time the silence feels different, heavier, more precise. You've left behind the Taoist spirals and stepped into a place with straighter lines, sharper edges, and cleaner floors. The scent of sandalwood gives way to ink and paper. This is the Confucian wing of the palace where even dreams must be trimmed and filed like imperial documents. And here you're not expected to fly with cranes or speak to turtles. You're expected to make moral sense. Confucian philosophy didn't dismiss dreams, but it didn't get lost in them either. Dreams were meaningful, yes, but only as reflections of character. In this worldview, you dream not because the heavens are speaking to you, but because your own soul is unsettled. If you dream of violence, you've probably strayed from the path of virtue. If you dream of shame or failure, your conscience is trying to correct your behavior. No prophecies, no magical journeys, just ethical feedback, whether you asked for it or not. You pass a study chamber where a Confucian scholar sits cross-legged reading a scroll beneath a polished jade lantern. He's not looking for symbols of dragons or phoenixes. He's looking for virtue. His job is to interpret the emperor's dreams, not in terms of destiny, but in terms of behavior. The emperor dreamed he was naked in front of the court. That's not a sign of rebellion. It's a sign he fears public shame, or knows deep down he's not living up to his duty. Confucians weren't interested in building shrines to dreams. They were interested in building better rulers. Emperor Ming of Han, for example, once recorded a dream where he was a child, again being scolded by his mother. When he awoke, he told his ministers. The Confucian scholars saw it as a good sign, evidence that the emperor retained humility and moral awareness. They praised him. A tax reform followed. Whether that was cause or coincidence, historians still argue. But the interpretation was influential enough to get copied into later dream manuals. You crouch beside a rack of old scrolls, fingering the binding cords. One of them catches your eye. It's titled Mengji Yi, loosely translated as On the Righteous Dream. Inside are dozens of short case studies. Each one ends not with an omen, but with an evaluation of the dreamer's moral status. Dreamt of fleeing wolves, interpreted as a sign of cowardice. Dreamt of lifting a mountain, read as delusions of grandeur. In this schema, no one escapes accountability, not even the emperor. You have to admire the bravery it took to tell a god king that his dream of flying likely meant he was too full of himself. But here's where things get complicated. While Confucian interpreters viewed dreams through a moral lens, they didn't ignore the social consequences. They knew that a wrong interpretation could cause panic or exile. So the most skilled among them walked a razor-thin line upholding ethical clarity while also gently massaging the emperor's ego. One particularly gifted scholar, Zhu Fan, was known for dream reports that always ended with a polite reminder: heaven tests most harshly those whom it favors most deeply. In other words, don't panic, Your Majesty, but maybe stop yelling at your generals. You step into another room, a smaller one, more austere. On a bamboo mat sits a young man, maybe 16, holding a brush he hasn't yet dared to use. He's training to become a Confucian dream reader. And tonight, for the first time, he'll read the dream of a prince. Not the emperor, not yet, but close enough to make his hands sweat. His teacher, seated across from him, recites softly: dreamt of climbing a stairway of mirrors, unable to reach the top. The boy hesitates, then replies: a fear of public failure. The dreamer feels he cannot fulfill the expectations of his title. The teacher nods once, the boy exhales. You realize this isn't just dream work. It's politics. Confucianism was always about order, structure, stability. And if the ruler's mind is in chaos that threatens the whole empire, dreams then become like early warning systems. They don't predict rebellion, they reflect decay starting from the top, as all rot does. Sometimes, though, the readings go wrong. One official during the Jin dynasty famously misread a dream about red blossoms falling into water. He called it a sign of poetic serenity. In truth, the emperor had been dreaming of his favorite concubine who just died in childbirth. The scholar was dismissed, not because he got the meaning wrong, but because he lacked empathy. Confucians held that morality wasn't just about logic. It was also about feeling, knowing when to soften and when to be firm. There's a story, likely apocryphal, but still told with a straight face, in some historical commentaries, of a Confucian scholar who dreamed every night of bowing endlessly in a red hall. After the 10th night, he confessed to the emperor, I believe I dreamed this because I'm too proud while awake. The emperor, impressed, assigned him to tutor the crown prince. Apparently humility, especially self-diagnosed humility, was worth rewarding. You leave the Confucian halls with your head full of quiet wisdom. There were no turtle shell prophecies here, no flying temples, just the slow, careful turning of thought. The belief that the dream world was not foreign but inward, that if the emperor dreamed of storms, he might not be seeing the future. He might just be reflecting his own guilt. You pass once more beneath a corridor etched with Confucian maxims. One reads, to govern others, one must first govern the self. Another, the heart like a mirror, must be cleaned to reflect the heavens. And suddenly you see it in Confucianism. The dream is not a message from the gods. It's a message from yourself. You return to the emperor's private quarters just as the sky outside begins to pale with morning light. The guards stand stiffer now, and the scent of dew has replaced last night's incense. Most of the palace is still asleep or pretending to be. But inside these walls, a dream has already begun to make its rounds. And not just any dream. This one predicts blood. You step quietly into the hall of inner advisors, where 4 men sit in a tight semicircle. A eunuch stands just behind them, holding a tightly bound bamboo scroll wrapped in vermilion silk. He hasn't spoken a word, but everyone knows what he's carrying. The emperor dreamt of fire licking the edge of a scroll. He shouted in his sleep, bolted upright. And now the entire inner court is on alert. Because in this world, when the emperor dreams of destruction, someone usually gets destroyed. This is the part no one talks about in dream scrolls or jade pillow charms. When a dream doesn't just influence politics, it becomes politics. You watch as the grand astrologer slowly unrolls the bamboo slips. His lips move silently as he reads, his eyes scanning not just the dream but the implications between the lines. A burning scroll paper was sacred. Records meant control. A burning scroll might mean the loss of history, or knowledge, or control itself. One minister clears his throat. Perhaps it simply reflects the emperor's frustration with endless reports. Everyone pretends to laugh. No one actually does. Another speaks more softly. Fire means unrest. Perhaps in the southern provinces, that gets nods and worried glances. You begin to notice how many people in this room have something to lose. One oversees the archives, another manages tax registers, a third controls foreign correspondence. All their fates are wrapped in that burning scroll, and none of them know whether it means their department or their heads. Welcome to the darker side of dream interpretation, the moments when a single metaphor can become the trigger for political purges, military action, or forced retirements disguised as spiritual retreats. During the later Han Dynasty, there was an incident that started much like this. Emperor An dreamed of a man with no face standing at the gates of the palace holding a torch made of straw. When he described it to his court, a single official, Wang Yun, interpreted it as a symbol of hidden enemies within the bureaucracy. The emperor, already paranoid, took action. Within a week, over a dozen ministers were arrested, several executed. Years later, a different scholar reviewed the dream and suggested a simpler reading. The faceless man was not a threat, but a call for introspection. A reminder that the emperor had grown detached from his people. Too late, of course. The damage was done. Historians still argue whether dreams like these were catalysts or excuses. Did the emperor truly believe in the symbolism? Or did he simply need a poetic way to justify the next political move? Was the dream an omen or a pretext? In truth, it may not have mattered. Because once a dream entered the court, it became real. You can feel the tension building in the room. The grand astrologer lays down the scroll. The scroll burned, but the emperor held it and was not harmed. The fire stopped at the seal. That changes everything. Now the ministers scramble to interpret. The empire faces danger, but the dynasty survives. Enemies will try to corrupt the truth, but they will not succeed. The seal remains, the emperor's authority is intact. The mood softens slightly, heads nod, but no one looks relieved, because even surviving a prophetic dream requires careful choreography. You think of other such cases, dreams that ignited real events. Emperor Gaozong of Tang once dreamed of a black wind sweeping through his chambers and extinguishing every lamp except one. He woke terrified. Within days, he reshuffled half his ministers. One man, a quiet bureaucrat named Wei Min, was promoted unexpectedly. Why, no one knows. But the legend says that he walked with a slight limp, just like the flickering lamp in the emperor's dream. There was even a case where an absence of dreams was taken as a sign. Emperor Huan reportedly went 27 nights without dreaming, or so he claimed. His Taoist advisors panicked. They believed the spirit world had stopped speaking to him. The Confucians argued it was a sign of inner balance. The astrologers, they blamed a misalignment of Jupiter. The emperor, annoyed, staged a fake dream involving a tiger in a bamboo grove just to quiet the fuss. But no one was fooled. Dreams were so embedded in governance that even failing to have one became a cause for alarm, like an oracle going silent, or a trusted advisor failing to write. And when dreams did come, their consequences could be brutal. You hear the eunuch now whispering a name. Minister Zhao, the Emperor requests your presence. Zhao stiffens. He was the one who submitted a report last week questioning the accuracy of the archives. You see it in his eyes. He's already imagining the scroll in flames. As he rises, the others look away, not out of cruelty, but because they all know when a dream turns, no one is safe. And this dream, this burning, silent, sleepless message, has already chosen its course. You step out with Zhao into the morning light, and suddenly the palace seems colder. The dream may have ended, but the consequences are only beginning. And tomorrow, there will be another dream. You wander now toward the quiet edge of the inner palace where the shadows soften and the walls are lined with tall lacquered cabinets. This part of the complex doesn't smell like fear or ritual incense. It smells like old books, faint traces of cedar-dried silk threads and the lingering perfume of pressed plum blossoms used to mark important pages. You found the dream dictionaries. Yes, literal ones. Neatly categorized scrolls, woodblock printed volumes, even hand-copied notebooks bound in patterned brocade. In the world of ancient China, if the emperor had a dream about a goat climbing a staircase while singing a folk song, there was probably a book that could explain it. A young archivist passes you carrying a stack of such books with reverent care. She balances them as if they're filled with secrets, which in a way they are. Because these aren't just sleepy musings scribbled in margins. They're attempts to decode the universe. The practice of cataloging dream symbols is older than the palace walls themselves. As early as the Zhou dynasty, scholars were making lists of common omens. A red horse change is coming, a broken tooth loss or betrayal, falling endlessly from the sky. Usually bad news, unless you land in a lotus. Of course, many of these meanings evolved over time. What meant prosperity in the Han era might signal decline in the Tang, and some meanings were deliberately changed by different regimes depending on what they needed the people or the emperor to believe. Dream books weren't just guides, they were tools of influence. One of the most famous compilations, Zhou Gong's Book of Auspicious and Inauspicious Dreams, was attributed perhaps wrongly to the legendary Duke of Zhou, an early sage. This text became the backbone for dream interpretation for centuries. It broke dreams into categories: natural elements, body parts, animals, actions, strange occurrences, each one listed with a symbolic meaning and often a corresponding ritual for balance. You flip one open, a random page, to dream of crossing a frozen river, a journey delayed but not lost. Another, to dream of losing your shoes, discord in the household. You can't help but think of how these meanings would play out in a modern context. Dreamt my phone was melting. Probably not in the ancient texts. But that's the fun of it. These books weren't fixed in time. They were updated, constantly rewritten to reflect the anxieties of each era. A dynasty plagued by famine might see dreams of spoiled rice differently than one ruled during peace and plenty. Some of these dictionaries included pillow scrolls, thin, foldable manuscripts placed under one's pillow to influence the subconscious. The theory: if you slept on wisdom, you'd absorb it, or perhaps dream better. One emperor even commissioned a pillow stuffed with shredded dream slips, hoping to draw the best meanings by proximity. You pause at a peculiar volume. The cover is black silk, embroidered with silver plum blossoms. Inside, the dream symbols are accompanied by illustration soft brush paintings of flying turtles, men with multiple eyes, a rainstorm shaped like a hand. It's oddly whimsical, but also clinical, because these books were not always poetic. Some had tables, charts, even flow diagrams to calculate meaning. If you dreamt of a tiger, you'd first check, was it chasing you? Was it speaking? Did it have wings? Each answer would guide you toward a meaning like a cosmic choose your own adventure. And if you think that sounds too analytical for ancient times, welcome to the paradox. These scholars were mystical engineers, combining intuition with structure. A Confucian would scoff, a Taoist would nod, and a desperate official hoping to survive another week at court would cling to every syllable. You move farther down the hall and find the forbidden shelf. No sign announces it, but you can tell by the dust and by the way no one looks toward it. These are the texts that were banned, censored, or hidden by decree. Some contained symbols deemed too dangerous to speak aloud. Others included dream combinations that were said to predict the death of an emperor or the rise of an unapproved heir. One entry you glimpse reads, "To dream of a child wearing the robes of a dragon, the empire shall pass to new hands." If an emperor dreamed that and it became known, you'd better believe heads would roll. Sometimes the very existence of certain symbols in print was enough to implicate the author in treason. Historians still debate whether these forbidden symbols were truly feared or simply feared for their political implications. Was a dream ever just a dream? In a world where belief shaped reality. You turn one last page and find a curious addition, a margin note written in a more casual hand. If you dream you are dreaming, be careful. You are being watched. A chill moves through you, because in this palace even that could be true. The archivist returns and nods politely. You hand her the book and she tucks it under her arm with quiet precision. Her movements are slow practiced, as if she's done this 1,000 times, as if she's memorized each symbol, not just as words, but as stories, as lives changed or ended because of what someone claimed a dream meant. And as she walks away, you realize, in a world where paper is power and symbols are fate, a dream dictionary isn't just a book. It's a loaded weapon. You step outside the records hall and into a different silence. Not the quiet of books or brocade, but the hush of fear, the strange stillness that lingers over a place where something inexplicable has happened. The corridor is empty, but you can feel the story still echoing through the walls. You've arrived at the site of the Night of Falling Stars. It's 320 CE, and you're standing in a city that has forgotten how to sleep. The capital Luoyang at the time trembles with unease, not from war, famine, or politics this time, but from something far stranger, a nightmare shared by thousands. It began with a rumor. A merchant's wife dreamt of stars falling into her rice bowl. The next morning she told her neighbors. By midday, 10 more people claimed to have had similar dreams. By nightfall, whole households were reporting visions of celestial collapsed stars plummeting like hailstones, constellations dissolving into fire. Within 3 days, panic had swept through the city like wildfire. Officials tried to downplay it. Coincidence, they said. Dream contagion, muttered others. But then came the real problem. The stars actually fell. A meteor shower, rare, dramatic, and uncomfortably well-timed, lit up the night sky. Bright streaks of light tearing through the heavens, just as people were trying desperately to unsee what had already haunted their sleep. It was enough to push belief into terror. Imagine it, you dream of a flaming sky, wake up frightened, try to laugh it off. Then that night the sky obeys. Even the emperor grew pale. He summoned astrologers, shamans, Confucians, Taoists, and one poor man from the Dream Bureau who reportedly fainted during the audience. The event became known in court circles as the Fire Rain Incident, and for weeks afterward no one slept easily. The interpretation, that was where things got messy. Taoists said it was the realm of immortals, reaching out trying to warn the emperor of a misalignment between heaven and earth. Confucians pointed to imperial failings, suggesting the shared dream was a judgment on the emperor's virtue. And the astrologers, perhaps most amusingly, simply stated, "We told you to expect meteors this year." But none of it mattered. The damage was done. Fear had taken root. You walk now through a gallery built decades later to commemorate the incident. Hanging scrolls depict the sky lit up with trails of fire. One panel shows terrified citizens pointing upward. Another shows a family praying under a willow tree. The captions are careful, measured, but between the lines you can sense it, the sheer dread of not knowing where the dream ends and the world begins. What made it worse was the speed at which the dreams spread. Most dreams, even the important ones, lived and died within the palace walls. But this was different. These dreams migrated. Like a storm, they jumped from household to household, class to class, as if some invisible hand were pulling strings no one could see. One woman claimed to have dreamt of the stars before ever hearing the rumors. A child scribbled stars falling onto rooftops before the first meteor ever struck. Historians still argue whether the incident was mass hysteria, an early example of collective trauma, or something more. Some think a grain fungus that caused hallucinations may have played a role. Others believe the meteor shower was timed close to a major lunar eclipse, rattling an already superstitious population. And of course, there are always those who say, maybe it really was a message. You stop at a scroll titled The Dream Map. It's a rough sketch of the capital, hand-drawn with red dots, marking the earliest reported dreams. Each day has a new layer showing how the visions spread through neighborhoods like a dream-based epidemic. It looks eerily like a modern virus outbreak chart, except the virus was fear. There's a quote painted at the top of the scroll. "When heaven speaks to many, the earth cannot sleep. The emperor responded with rituals. Offerings were made to the spirits of the stars. Golden altars were erected in temple courtyards. Oxen were sacrificed. Priests stayed awake for 3 nights, reciting protective verses. And in a surprising move, the emperor offered amnesty to minor criminals, just in case the dreams were a divine protest against injustice. It wasn't the only time mass dreams shook the capital. In later years, reports would surface of coordinated dreams. In border provinces, peasants dreaming of the same animal, or travelers seeing identical visions of mountains crumbling. But nothing ever reached the scale of that night in 320. It remained unique, a single terrifying collision between dream and reality. You step into a quieter room now, a small shrine, really. Candles flicker around a central sculpture, a celestial sphere carved from black jade dotted with silver for stars. Beneath it lies an inscription: "The stars fell, the people dreamed, the empire remembered." A simple bench sits in front of it, worn smooth by time. You sit for a moment, letting the silence soak into your bones. And as you look up, you realize something. What scared them most wasn't the meteor shower. It was that it proved the dream was right, not just symbolic, not just spiritual. Correct? And in a world where dreams were supposed to warn you about reality, not match it, that kind of accuracy wasn't comforting. It was horrifying. The palace has settled now, its halls emptied of night wanderers and its courtyards flooded with the golden haze of morning. But for emperors, sleep is not something that ends with sunrise. It's a practice, a performance, one that must be cultivated, curated, and occasionally indulged. Because tonight your journey shifts into the most intimate chambers of imperial life. Welcome to the emperor's bedroom. No, not like that. Relax. This isn't a scandalous story. It's a lesson in luxurious absurdity. You walk through layered screens embroidered with clouds and cranes, each more opulent than the last, until you arrive at a room that feels more like a temple than a bedroom. The air is soft, quiet, purposefully heavy. Because this is not a place for tossing and turning, this is a place for dreaming correctly. You see the bed first, if you can call it that. It's more like a ceremonial platform, raised, surrounded by carved railings draped in sheer silk veils, the mattress stuffed with goose down, the sheets woven from lotus thread fabric imported from distant provinces, the pillows each filled with something different, green tea leaves for clarity, sandalwood, shavings for calm, and in one case, shreds of sacred text to invite wisdom. You've heard of beauty sleep. This is dynastic sleep. And the preparations, let's just say the emperor didn't simply flop into bed after a long day of ruling. No, there were rituals, carefully layered acts of winding down that made modern bedtime routines look like chaos. First came the bath, in rose water naturally, sometimes with flakes of real silver, believed to reflect dreams away from the body if they were too heavy. Then came the oils, lavender, mugwort, apricot kernel, massaged into the temples, while low music was played by invisible musicians in an adjacent chamber. Then, and only then, came the wine. Yes, dream wine, a specially fermented blend of rice plum and peony root, boiled briefly with crushed jade powder and aged in moonlight. It was consumed warm in tiny sips from a porcelain cup etched with calligraphy like "To dream is to rule without sword," because of course even wine had to sound philosophical. You imagine the emperor at this moment reclining on his carved bed, gazing up at a silk canopy painted with stars. Outside, the real stars move across the sky. Inside the court, waits to see which ones he'll meet in his sleep. This is where it gets even stranger. The imperial dream bed wasn't just for comfort. It was also a tool engineered to guide the mind into certain states. In some dynasties, it was believed that the position of the bed affected the angle of incoming dreams. North-south for ancestral visions, east-west for political insights. The emperor's bed was often rotated monthly to stay in tune with the lunar cycle. Above the bed hung tiny bells strung with colored silk, not to wake him, but to ward off wandering spirits. And beneath the bed, little boxes containing herbs, stones, and in at least one case, a dead cicada meant to symbolize rebirth through dreams. Weird, sure, but not so different from hanging dream catchers or sleeping with crystals. Right now, step quietly to the table beside the bed, laid out with a sleeping scroll, a brush, and a seal. If the emperor woke during the night with a particularly vivid vision, he could record it himself, or more likely summon an aide to do it for him while he dictated with his eyes half closed. And if the dream was unclear, There were dream coaches, actual officials, trained in both mysticism and rhetoric, who could be summoned to ask questions like, did the white horse speak before or after the lotus appeared, or was the water still, or did it ripple? Their goal wasn't to interpret. Not yet. It was to capture the dream's texture, its temperature, its weight. You stroll to another chamber connected to the sleeping quarters. Here you find a small team of attendants preparing for the next night, already laying out fresh robes, placing new stones under the mattress, brushing tiny golden characters onto the bed frame. The characters spell words like clarity, stillness, mandate, dream. This was serious business, and surprisingly competitive, because a good dream could make or break careers. If the emperor had a vision of a rising sun and happened to see your face in the dream, congratulations, your entire family might be promoted. If he dreamt of drowning in paperwork, you'd better believe some bureaucrat was about to be accused of mismanaging scrolls. There's a famous case from the Song dynasty where an emperor dreamt of walking barefoot on a field of thorns, guided by a man with one eye. The next morning he summoned his ministers and asked, who here is missing an eye? Naturally, nobody volunteered. But later that week, a minor official with a scarred eyelid brought forward a petition urging tax reform. The emperor declared, "You are the guide," and promoted him to chancellor. Was it real, symbolic, just, opportunistic timing? You decide. Historians still argue whether these dream-inspired decisions were genuine convictions or clever manipulations of mythology. One theory says that some dreams were even staged through whispered suggestions, planted stories, or carefully timed fragrances to guide the emperor's sleep toward a desired conclusion. Yes, dream politics, literally. And all of this happened before the emperor even got out of bed. As you step back into the courtyard, the wind brushes your face and you realize how far the empire went to control what couldn't be controlled. Sleep was treated like statecraft, dreams like decrees. Because when you're the son of heaven, you don't just rule the day, you rule the night too. The sun now hovers overhead, casting soft light through the latticed windows of the eastern wing of the palace. But even in this bright calm, something darker stirs beneath the surface. You're standing outside a chamber that doesn't appear on any official map. No ornate doors, no guards in armor. Just a simple wooden panel, modest by imperial standards, with a painted image of an open eye. This is where the watchers work. You step inside and the atmosphere changes instantly. The room is quiet, but not peaceful, more like the silence you find in a library of secrets. Long wooden desks line the walls, covered in scrolls and tightly packed dream reports. A single bronze incense burner flickers with smoke that curls upward like a question nobody wants to answer, because you've just entered the realm of dream spies. Yes, they existed in a court obsessed with interpreting sleep. It was only a matter of time before someone thought, what if we listened more closely? What if we monitored not just the emperor's dreams, but those of his advisors, his family, even his concubines? It started with good intentions, probably. A well-meaning minister suggesting that tracking the dreams of key officials could help identify threats. If a general consistently dreamed of blood and fire, perhaps he was harboring rebellion. If a scholar dreamt of falling, maybe he was doubting the emperor's favor. But quickly it evolved. Soon the palace staff included men whose sole job was to eavesdrop on dreams. Not in the mystical sense, in the literal one. One dream spy would pose as a servant or masseur, tending to a minister just before bed, listening for whispered concerns. Another might be stationed just outside the sleeping quarters of a high-ranking concubine, trained to hear through paper walls and translate murmured sleep-speak into possible sedition. It wasn't foolproof, of course. Dreams are vague. People talk in their sleep. But in a court where interpretation equals influence, even the suspicion of a dangerous dream could shift someone's future. You study one scroll on the desk. It's labeled simply Case 47 Blue Garden. Inside, a dream is transcribed in full. The dreamer, an assistant scribe, saw himself walking through a garden filled with blue trees. He hears voices urging him to plant the seed of silence. At first glance, harmless. But the report doesn't stop there. The dream spy adds dreamer recently copied 2 censored petitions. Possible metaphor for subversive thought. A note in red ink reads, "Monitor. No arrest, no accusation, just a shadow placed over someone's name." The emperor never hears about most of these. They're not for him. They're for those just below him, the ones who want to keep their hands clean, but their eyes everywhere. The practice became so accepted that some officials began preemptively reporting their own dreams in exaggerated detail, hoping to control the narrative. "Last night I dreamt of a white ox entering the granary" becomes a subtle way of saying I'm loyal. I bring prosperity. Entire careers were built on such carefully curated nightmares. And then there were the ones who tried to weaponize it. Rumors speak of a minister who fabricated dream reports about his rival, submitting them anonymously to the Bureau of Omens. One dream allegedly showed the rival seated on a dragon throne, smiling. Another had him walking through an empty palace. By the time the accusations were investigated, the rival was already disgraced officially for tax mismanagement, unofficially for dreaming too ambitiously. Historians still debate whether the entire affair was orchestrated. The rival, it said, never even slept in the palace. Of course, not every dream spy worked with such subtlety. Some were ruthless, others poetic. One infamous record includes the line, "The dreamer wept while naming plum blossoms," interpreted as longing for lost power. A stretch. Perhaps. But it was enough. And then there's the most chilling form of dream espionage, deliberate suggestion. Servants, concubines, even musicians were trained to whisper phrases near sleeping ears. Phrases like, "The river overflows, but only the wise build boats," or "He who is empty cannot be broken." These whispers, planted like seeds, might bloom into dreams, and those dreams into choices. You pause in front of a panel covered with small red stamps. Each stamp marks a confirmed case of influenced dreaming. Over 50 are listed. Most don't include names, just initials, years, outcomes. One says simply 1127 dream prompted reform of land policy. You can't help but wonder what would happen if your dreams were monitored, measured, and dissected by a team of strangers while you slept. What parts of yourself would they misunderstand? Or worse, what truths might they uncover that you'd rather not know? You leave the chamber feeling a little less solid, as if your own memories might be misfiled. Because in this palace, your dreams don't belong to you. They belong to the empire. You step out into the daylight again, blinking beneath a long eave of carved roof tiles shaped like dragons mid-yawn. The court is beginning to stir now. Advisors assembling scrolls, eunuchs issuing soft orders, servants sweeping away petals. The wind has scattered through stone courtyards. And yet, In the midst of all this order, there's still one lingering mystery no one quite agrees on. Was it real? Did the Emperor actually journey through celestial mountains last night? Did the general truly fly over a blood-red sea? Or was it something far more mundane too? Much duck stew? Too little sleep? A pillow positioned just slightly wrong? This is the ongoing debate that buzzes beneath the surface of every ornate dream scroll. Was it a message from the heavens or just indigestion? You find yourself in a courtyard known as the Garden of Soft Questions, a name earned not from any official naming decree, but because so many confused servants, monks, and low-level ministers came here to ask quietly, wait, what did that mean? At the center stands a small pavilion. Inside, a Taoist monk and a Confucian scholar sit across from one another sipping tea. They don't argue, not openly, but you can tell from their narrowed eyes and the slow, careful refills of their cups, their mid-disagreement. The scholar insists the emperor's dream of walking through a tunnel of weeping peach trees is a reflection of internal guilt, perhaps related to a harsh judgment issued last month. The monk shakes his head. He visited the Hall of Forgotten Joys, he says, referencing a mythic realm in Taoist cosmology. He needs spiritual cleansing. Then a third voice joins in, an herbalist from the palace kitchens. Did he eat the fermented crab soup again? That always gives me tunnel dreams. And there it is. The third leg of this ancient debate body-soul, or lunch. This is not a joke. In many dynasties, imperial doctors were required to submit digestive reports alongside dream logs. If His Majesty dreamed of fire, but had also eaten spicy mustard greens before bed, that context mattered. If he floated weightlessly through the clouds, but had taken a particularly potent herbal tonic, someone made a note of it. A dream was never interpreted in isolation. You had to consider the environment, the health of the dreamer, the phase of the moon, and yes, the contents of dinner. There's even a legendary case from the late Tang period when a dream was retracted. Emperor Zhaozong dreamt of 100 black butterflies flying into his mouth. Naturally, his court was horrified. Interpretations ranged from impending death to spiritual possession to being metaphorically consumed by lies. But then a low-ranking kitchen attendant, trembling with fear, came forward and confessed he had accidentally switched 2 food storage pots. The emperor had eaten 6 servings of a pickled eggplant known to cause vivid hallucinations. Zhaozong paused, then laughed so hard that he canceled court the next day. Historians still argue whether the eggplant saved the lives of several ministers. Probably. The ancient Chinese called such ambiguous experiences phantom dreams, those that straddled the line between spiritual truth and physical cause. In many dream dictionaries, there was a small footnote section listing foods and their likely effects. Lotus root serene dreams, eel nightmares, garlic chaotic visions, often involving fire or teeth. And then, of course, there were the herbal dream tonics. These weren't just sleep aids. They were curated cocktails of root flower bark and mineral meant to guide dreams. Want to receive a vision of your ancestors? Drink the 3-cloud elixir made with snow, chrysanthemum deer, antler shavings, and moon-distilled water. Want to avoid nightmares? A pinch of burned sandalwood ash stirred into hot wine, but these concoctions were temperamental. One court physician wrote of a miscalculation that resulted in the emperor dreaming he was chased through the palace by oversized ants in official robes. For a week afterward, he refused to hold court in the council chamber. It wasn't always harmless. In rare but whispered about cases, dreams were deliberately manipulated through food or drink. A rival might slip a dream-influencing herb into a wine cup. A monk might dose himself with visions to gain favor. There's one disturbing case involving a prince who repeatedly dreamt of snakes encircling his throne until it was discovered his tea had been laced with extract from a hallucinogenic vine. Whether the dreams were real or planted didn't matter. The fear they provoked was enough. And so the palace developed yet another department, the Bureau of Sleep Health. Its job: to track the emperor's diet, sleep environment, and physical well-being in conjunction with his dream life. If he had a troubling dream, the Bureau would cross-reference it with his dinner menu, bedding temperature, and even the type of incense burned during meditation. A dream of drowning. Perhaps the pillows were too thick. A dream of fire. The sleeping chamber had been warmed excessively. A dream of levitation. Maybe the emperor was simply happy. You sit now beneath a plum tree watching petals fall like quiet punctuation marks on the stone floor. And you start to understand this obsession with dreams wasn't just about belief, it was about control. Because in a world where emperors ruled by divine mandate, where spirits whispered and ancestors watched, the only thing more dangerous than a bad dream was a dream no one could explain. And if you could blame it on the duck stew, sometimes that was the safest option of all. You follow the winding path past a mossy courtyard wall and through a side gate where vines have crept along the stone for generations. Here the walls are closer together, the air heavier with perfume. The laughter you hear is gentler, measured, studied. You've entered a different power center in the dream world. Welcome to the inner quarters where the women of the palace sleep and dream. It's easy to forget amid the scrolls and astrologers and bureaucratic drama that some of the most influential dreams didn't come from emperors. They came from the women closest to them. Empresses' consorts favored concubines, women who by custom lacked formal power but understood the language of symbols, timing, and myth. Because in the world of ancient Chinese court, life claiming a dream was sometimes the only way a woman could speak with authority. You pause beside a silk-curtained doorway. Inside, two concubines whisper over tea, their voices low, rhythmic, like a chant. One leans in and says, "Last night I saw a red phoenix land on my wrist." The other gasps, covering her mouth. That's no idle poetry. In the symbolic vocabulary of the court, phoenix means heavenly favor, especially when it appears in dreams. And the wrist, a place of adornment suggesting the dreamer is soon to be gifted with status. That's how fast things can change here. A single dream, artfully described, can elevate a girl from silk washing servant to imperial consort, especially if the emperor believes it, or if she tells him just after he's had wine. There's a legendary tale of Lady Wu, a concubine who dreamt of a golden dragon coiled inside her womb. She claimed it aloud in front of eunuchs and scribes just days before she announced her pregnancy. That child became an emperor. And Lady Wu became Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman in Chinese history to officially rule as emperor in her own name. Was the dream real? Did she even have it? Or did she know that planting such a vision at such a moment would lend divine legitimacy to her unborn son? Historians still argue. But her rise cannot be separated from the dream she claimed. You pass a vanity table where dream charms are laid out like weapons in a private arsenal embroidered sachets of jasmine and mugwort. Tiny scrolls, tied in crimson thread mirrors, etched with phrases like, "May heaven speak to me tonight." These weren't mere trinkets, they were instruments of strategy. In these rooms, women learned to walk the narrow bridge between vulnerability and vision. A dream could make you powerful or make you disappear. Concubines were often the most skilled dream weavers in the palace. Forbidden from speaking openly in court, matters they learned to encode their influence into metaphor. If a woman dreamed of a locked garden, it might mean someone was hiding a secret. If she dreamed of a crane landing beside a tortoise, she might suggest a new alliance between youth and experience. If she dreamed of drowning, sometimes she wouldn't dare say it aloud. But always someone would be listening. There's a scroll preserved in the Hall of Whispered Petitions, written by a concubine whose name is lost to history. It reads, "I dreamed I was a candle, lit by no one, flickering in wind that carried no scent. When I woke, the emperor had not summoned me in 40 days. She submitted the scroll sealed in green wax. That evening, the emperor sent for her. Did he feel guilt, curiosity, or was he simply intrigued by the poetic despair? We'll never know. But her position was restored. In rare cases, a woman's dream would reach beyond palace politics into state affairs. One empress claimed to have dreamed of a river drying up beneath a field of red poppies. She insisted it was a sign that drought was coming. The astrologers hesitated, the dream interpreters argued, but the emperor chose to believe her. He ordered food stores redistributed preemptively. 2 months later, the rains failed, and the empress, who had previously been seen as ornamental, was now regarded as a voice of heaven. Of course, not all dreams were welcomed. If a woman dreamed too boldly, claimed too much, or hinted at a fate that cast a shadow over the emperor's future, she might be silenced, or exiled, or worse, quietly erased from the records. These were the forbidden dreams, not because they were dark, but because they were inconvenient. One particularly chilling case involves a mid-level concubine who dreamt that a white snake curled around the emperor's throat and whispered, "Your name will be forgotten." She told no one except a friend. The friend, eager for advancement, reported it. Within a week, the dreamer was gone. No reason given. You continue through the painted hallways, stepping lightly over a tiled floor designed to muffle sound, because here dreams are whispered, not spoken, shared in riddles, hidden inside fan paintings or sewn into the lining of robes, a pine tree embroidered in white thread. That's not decoration, it's a private symbol for endurance. A mirror left, face down on a pillow. It's a silent confession of despair. And you realize something as you move among these veiled courtyards and plum-scented chambers. The women of the court may not have held the throne, but they held the dreams. They planted them, shaped them, spoke them into the emperor's ears when no minister dared to advise. They lived on the edge of visibility, always watched, rarely seen. And in the hush of their bedrooms, beneath moon-dappled ceilings, they became prophets of their own survival, not through sword or seal, but through sleep. You walk now beneath painted beams where the colors have faded just slightly enough to show their age, enough to remind you that nothing in the palace lasts forever. Not titles, not power, not even the dreams that once set the halls on fire. This part of the compound is quieter, less polished, not forgotten but avoided. This is where the eunuchs sleep. They don't hold scrolls, they don't interpret stars, but they see everything, and more importantly, they remember. You descend a narrow stairway that leads beneath one of the outer halls. It's cool here and damp. Lamps hang from rusted chains, casting uneven light on rows of cots and bundles of spare robes. At first glance, it seems humble, even peaceful. But then you notice the small shrine tucked into the far corner. It's not grand, no gold. Just 3 polished stones and a folded scrap of cloth with 4 careful brush strokes. My dream is not mine. A eunuch's life was one of paradoxes. They had access to the emperor's most intimate spaces, yet remained voiceless in politics. They knew every creak of the palace floor, every weakness in the walls, yet had no heirs to inherit their memories. So they did what they could, they dreamed quietly. And sometimes those dreams mattered. There's a story, half recorded, half whispered, of a senior eunuch during the Northern Song dynasty who dreamt of a black carp swimming against a red current. The image was so vivid he reported it to a low-level priest. Within days, news arrived that a regional governor had raised troops and declared rebellion, symbolized in that dream perhaps by the red current. The carp, the emperor, struggling to stay afloat. The emperor never learned who dreamt it, but the court rewarded someone else for the warning. The eunuch, he kept dreaming unnoticed, unthanked. This was common. Eunuchs existed in a kind of waking dream already neither fully within the inner court nor without it. They saw the emperor in states few others did, weeping, drunk, feverish, or laughing like a child. And they heard things others missed, the mutterings in sleep, the restless pacing before dawn. They became unintentional keepers of dreams, and sometimes even scapegoats. You pass a door scratched with symbols that don't appear in any official lexicon circles inside triangles lines, crossing diagonally. Not words marks, records. Perhaps a private dream code known only to the ones who served silently and watched the world turn from beneath the floorboards. But not all eunuchs were passive. Some used dreams to shape their fate. One particularly cunning eunuch, Gao Jin, claimed to have nightly dreams that included messages from the late emperor. Whether real or invented his detailed descriptions, he wore white and walked on clouds. He said, "Preserve the border gates, but beware the snake with golden teeth," gave him a reputation as a spiritual intermediary. Suddenly, he had value. He was granted more authority. His words were feared. Historians still argue whether Gao Jin was a visionary or a liar. But one fact remains. The border gate he warned about was attacked, and Gao Jin lived to tell more dreams. Others weren't so lucky. A young eunuch once recounted a dream where he saw the empress weeping in a garden, her tears turning into pearls that shattered upon touching the ground. A scribe overheard. A rumor spread. The empress, known for her cold demeanor, was insulted. The eunuch disappeared the next day. His bunk was cleared before sundown. And so a tradition developed among eunuchs to avoid speaking of their dreams at all. Some wore tiny bells on their wrists as they slept to jolt them awake before they could murmur aloud. Others practiced dream blanking rituals, small stones placed under the tongue before sleep, thought to erase memory of visions by morning. A kind of self-erasure, safer that way. But not all could resist. Dreams are, after all, a kind of rebellion, a place where those with no legacy can still become something, a hero, a a river, a voice that carries beyond death. You stop beside another cot. On the floor beneath it rests a folded fan, inked with a single phrase. In my dream I wore armor. Simple. Devastating. For someone denied family title, even manhood to dream of armor wasn't just escapism. It was a reclaiming. A fantasy not of revenge, but of identity. There's a beauty in that. You step back out into the light and find yourself blinking. The palace, so rigid from above, so hierarchical, suddenly seems softer from here. As if the true soul of the court isn't etched in golden beams, but whispered in dreams that no one's supposed to hear. And yet somehow, they remain, floating just beneath the surface, carried from servant to scribe, from concubine to eunuch, a network of silence, a chorus of forgotten voices, because even the ones who sleep in the shadows still dream, and sometimes their dreams are truer than any imperial edict. The corridor you follow now is older, its wood worn to a shine, not by polish, but by generations of quiet footsteps. You descend into a room sealed off from public tours, from guidebooks and palace maps, a place where even the most seasoned scribes hesitate to linger. This is where the forbidden scrolls are kept. And yes, they're real. Not rumor, not legend, but tangible rolls of silk and bamboo bound in black cord stored in lacquered cases without labels. No decoration, no catalog, just a lingering scent of pine resin and something harder to name, dust perhaps, or silence too old to disturb. These are the dreams no one was meant to read. You take a cautious seat on a woven mat before the smallest cabinet marked with a brass plate that simply reads, "Sealed by order of heaven." You don't know who wrote that. You're not sure anyone does. But someone thought it necessary to hide these texts away, not because they were too sacred, because they were too dangerous. You unroll the first scroll. The ink is faded but legible. It begins without ceremony. On the 8th night of the Plum Blossom Festival, His Majesty dreamed of a palace made of glass. Within it men bowed backward, and the throne faced a wall. There's no interpretation, no comforting reassurance. Just the stark, poetic terror of the image, a dream of inversion, of broken structure, of the emperor dethroned by reflection itself. You glance down at the margin. There's a single symbol inked in red G, meaning forbidden or taboo. This dream was not to be discussed. Many of these scrolls follow a pattern. They describe not the usual dreamscape symbols, cranes, coins, peach trees, but scenes that suggest rebellion, corruption, collapse. Dreams where the emperor loses control, where the ancestors weep, where heaven turns its back. In the rigid structure of imperial ideology, such dreams weren't symbolic. They were scandalous. Because if the emperor's dreams are messages from heaven and those dreams say, "You are no longer worthy," then what is left? You examine another scroll, one known only through second-hand mention in an obscure Song Dynasty commentary. It was recovered here, deep within this chamber. The dream reads, "A boy with a lion's head carried a mirror to the sun. As the emperor looked into it, his face disappeared." Interpret that however you like. The court didn't bother. They buried the scroll, sealed the room, and banned all references to mirrors in ceremonial poetry for a decade. Historians still argue whether these scrolls were ever shown to the emperors at all. Some believe they were intercepted, caught by dream scribes who sensed the political risk and hid them out of fear or loyalty. Others claim certain emperors did read them, then ordered their suppression. But one thing is certain: the existence of these scrolls implies a contradiction at the heart of the empire. If dreams are divine, what happens when they indict the divine? You find a scroll more recent than the others, dated late Ming. It recounts a dream of a white river flowing backward through the palace. Servants dissolve into ash. A bell rings, but no one hears it. Written in the margin, dreamer requested this scroll never be opened. And yet here it is. Some scrolls are blank, except for the title, The Dream with No Words. Others are written in an obsolete cipher, requiring complex lunar calendars and astrological codes to interpret. A few are smeared ink, bleeding into silk, as though the act of writing the dream was too much to bear. One is scorched at the edge, a burn mark perfectly circular, rumored to be from an attempt to destroy it, thwarted by a minister who claimed the dream predicted the very fall of the dynasty. He was executed. The scroll was preserved. And here's the strangest thing. A few of these forbidden scrolls contain dreams that later came true. One describes a city swallowed by rising water. A decade later, the Yellow River flooded and displaced millions. Another recounts an emperor struck down not by war, but by a cough carried on camel breath. Some say it referred to disease, others to a foreign envoy. Either way, the emperor died 2 years later from an unexplained illness after meeting an ambassador from the West. Were these predictions coincidences, retellings crafted after the fact to seem prophetic? Even today, no one knows, but their secrecy speaks volumes. Why hide a dream if it's meaningless? Unless, of course, it's not meaningless at all. You rise from the mat and roll the scroll closed with care. As you place it back into its slot, you notice a final inscription, carved discreetly into the wood of the cabinet. Do not seek truth in the dreams of kings. Seek warnings. The air in the room has grown colder, or maybe you've simply stayed too long. As you step back into the daylight, you realize the palace isn't just built on stone wealth or military might. It's built on narratives and a forbidden dream. It's a narrative too sharp to name. You leave the darkness of the sealed scroll room behind and walk toward a hallway suffused with bright sunlight. The polished floors reflect your footsteps back at you, but even the brightness can't mask the tension that lives in this part of the palace, because this is where you meet the emperor who tried to ban sleep. Yes, really. His name was Emperor Zhen, a lesser-known but widely whispered about sovereign from the early 5th century. His reign, though brief, has been remembered for one remarkable and deeply unsettling obsession: the eradication of dreams. Not because he thought dreams were meaningless, but because he believed they were dangerous. You pause beneath a painted panel depicting the emperor seated on his throne, eyes wide, unsleeping. The paint has cracked slightly with age, but his expression remains fierce, alert, desperate. Legend says Emperor Zhen began his war on sleep after a series of increasingly violent dreams. A palace roof collapsing rivers of blood, washing through gardens, the sun flickering like a candle before vanishing entirely. He reported these dreams in detail to his court, and the dream interpreters, in turn, offered increasingly grim prophecies. A rebellion was near, they said. A celestial judgment. A divine rejection. Instead of bracing his forces or appeasing heaven through rituals, Zhen decided to attack the source of the problem. He ordered that his sleep be limited to no more than 1 hour per night. He had attendants rouse him every 15 minutes with bells or poetry. He walked the halls until his legs buckled. When even that wasn't enough, he had incense made from wakeful herbs, a concoction of pepper oil, eagle feather, and powdered rhubarb root burned continuously in his chamber. The effect was predictable and terrifying. Within days, he began to hallucinate. Ministers reported him speaking to people who weren't present. Once he accused the Minister of Agriculture of having borrowed his voice in the dream world. No one understood what it meant, but the minister was demoted anyway. Sleep deprivation dreams are not like ordinary dreams. They arrive in flashes, fractured, sharp around the edges. And because Zhen refused to enter proper sleep, his mind began to invent images in waking life. The palace could no longer tell where his reality ended and his imagination began. He believed himself to be the victim of dream warfare. He blamed his court, his concubines, even the ancestors, anyone who might have entered his mind. He commissioned a team of monks to craft a protective headpiece said to be lined with sacred scripture and mercury threads to shield his thoughts. He wore it for 10 straight days. By now, even the dream interpreters were afraid. They stopped analyzing his visions altogether, or worse, they began to invent pleasant ones. Your Majesty, the green tiger from last night symbolizes national prosperity. Yes, the fire spoke blessings, not curses. These fabrications calmed him temporarily, but not for long. The emperor began to lash out. He banned any court official from discussing their own dreams. Dream logs were burned. Dream dictionaries were buried in ceremonial pits. The Bureau of Omens was shut down. Astrologers were reassigned to agricultural duty. Dreaming itself, Zhen declared, was a sign of disloyalty. You dream, you doubt, and doubt to him was treason. Some ministers tried to reason with him. They cited Confucian texts, arguing that dreams were natural reflections of the mind. Others invoked Taoist principles that dreams could offer, healing, not harm. But Zhen refused. I will be the emperor who wakes, he reportedly said. And so the palace adapted. Attendants learned to lie. They would sneak herbs into his food to make him sleep just a little enough to give him rest without him knowing. Dreams were carefully filtered. One eunuch developed a method of rewriting Zhen's dreams before they were recorded, turning ominous scenes into harmless ones. A dead horse became a peaceful river crossing. A collapsing bridge became a waterfall. It worked for a time. But Emperor Zhen was not easily fooled. When he discovered the tampering, his fury was absolute. The scribe who softened the dreams was executed. The palace doctor who administered the sleep herbs was exiled. Even the incense makers were punished, accused of blending deceit into smoke. Eventually, Zhen's health declined. His body, denied the rhythm of rest, began to unravel. His eyes darkened. His memory faltered. And the dreams, the ones he fought so hard to suppress, began to return, not in sleep, but in waking life. He once halted a diplomatic meeting, insisting that the visiting envoy was made of shadow. Another time he stood at the palace gates, in full armor, claiming he'd been summoned by a dream to defend the empire from the invisible army. No one ever arrived. Historians still debate what happened in the final days of his reign. One account claims he collapsed during a nighttime patrol of the southern courtyard, eyes open, mumbling something about the sun inside the mirror. Another says he simply vanished, locked himself in his chambers, and refused all food, water, or contact. Either way, when his successor finally took the throne, the first act passed was the reinstatement of dream records. The Bureau of Omens was reopened. The dream dictionaries unburied. and Emperor Zhen. He was remembered not as the man who saw the future, but as the man who feared it so much he tried to stop dreaming entirely. You pause beneath a fraying tapestry embroidered with waves and clouds. The caption sewn into the bottom reads, "The eye that never closes cannot weep." A beautiful idea and a terrible curse, because in trying to protect himself from the chaos of dreams, Zhen created something far worse, a mind that had nowhere left to go but inward spinning forever in sleepless terror. Sometimes the only thing more dangerous than dreaming is trying to escape it. You emerge from the cold shadow of Emperor Zhen's legacy and into a breezier hall where sun filters through gauzy curtains embroidered with cranes and winding rivers. The mood here is softer, calmer. You're entering the part of the palace designed not to suppress dreams, but to welcome them. This is the home of the Dream Temple's state-sponsored sanctuaries of slumber. Yes, you read that right. There was a time in ancient China when officials were encouraged to take naps, not out of laziness, but out of civic duty. Because if dreams could reveal divine insights or warnings, then surely it made sense to fund the process. Provide comfortable bedding, maintain peaceful rooms, support public dreaming like public prayer. And so temples were built. You step into one now and the hush feels like silk drawn slowly over stone. There are no gold dragons here, no towering thrones. Just a long, airy hall filled with low couches, draped in blue linens, bowls of warm water to wash the face, and polished headrests shaped like resting clouds. A monk passes by, silently placing a slip of paper beside a sleeping official's hand. The paper reads only, "Remember the peach orchard." You realize you're witnessing a form of what today might be called guided dreaming, the monk planting a seed, hoping it will grow into a vision useful to the empire. This practice had many names: Zhongmeng focused dreams, Xiangxiu fragrant rest, or simply court slumber. And it wasn't reserved for emperors. High-ranking advisors, military commanders, even provincial governors were sometimes invited or ordered to spend the night in these temples, preparing themselves for dreams that might reveal solutions to difficult problems. One emperor reportedly required his entire council to sleep in the dream temple for 3 nights before making a decision about raising taxes. The result? A surprising consensus. 4 officials dreamt of a cracked rice bowl. 1 dreamt of a weeping farmer. Another dreamt of coins being swallowed by a pig. The interpretation: the people couldn't handle more burdens. The tax increase was shelved. Did the dreams cause it, or were they just an elegant way for the court to express hesitations too dangerous to say aloud? Historians still debate, but the power of the dream remained. You walk past a small side chamber labeled Chamber of Sleep Trials. Inside is a fascinating relic, a circular dream wheel once used to select lucky sleepers for major state questions. The idea, rather than rely on one person's vision, dream diversity was seen as more stable. The wheel was spun, and those chosen, usually 5 or 7, were instructed to eat special meals, say prescribed prayers, and sleep in assigned directions to encourage visionary dreams. The best dreams were transcribed. The rest, forgotten. Even dream failure had structure here, and this wasn't mystical free-for-all. The dream temples were often managed by monks trained in both spiritual doctrine and bureaucratic protocol. They kept detailed dream logs, managed incense recipes to produce specific emotional states, and even used sounds, flute music, wind chimes to influence subconscious imagery. A A dream of water might suggest instability. A dream of bridges, reconciliation. A dream of wolves, time to check the border regions. And sometimes the dreams were so vivid, so haunting, that they caused panic even in these tranquil halls. One record describes a senior monk who dreamed of a tree growing upside down its roots in the sky. He awoke shaken and insisted that the empire had been turned against nature. That week, a major earthquake struck the western provinces. Coincidence, maybe. But the story was preserved, passed on, repeated. Even today, that dream is used as a metaphor for corrupt leadership. But not all dreams were ominous. Some were gentle. There's a famous case of a government clerk who dreamt of an old woman giving him tea. Nothing more. He told the temple's interpreter, expecting to be ignored, but the monk smiled. The empire is stable, he said. When our dreams are small and kind, heaven is at peace. No new laws were passed that day. You move through the temple's rear courtyard, now where low stone benches face a pond covered in lotus blossoms. It's not grand, but it's deliberate. The water reflects the sky, a reminder that what is above is also below, that dreams, like reflections, are neither fully real nor fully fake. The emperors knew this, and so did their people. So these temples weren't just for insight, they were for balance. In a court full of scheming ministers, ambition, and tension, the Dream Temple offered a brief reprieve. Here truth didn't come from shouting matches or court scrolls. It came in the quiet drift of sleep, in the gentler rhythms of breath, in the slow blooming of a strange, peaceful image in the dark. And sometimes those dreams made more sense than 1,000 political arguments. Of course, not everyone believed. Skeptics called it state-funded napping. One official reportedly sneered. While they dream of tigers, the real ones cross our borders. His comment was noted. He was not invited back. But even the critics had to admit the Dream Temple served a purpose. They gave form to the formless. They soothed minds burdened by power. And perhaps most importantly, they reminded the court that not all wisdom arrives awake. As you exit through the incense-scented doors, a new sign catches your eye carved above the lintel. In waking, we debate. In dreaming, we agree. You smile. Because here, finally, is a place where sleep isn't weakness. It's strategy. You walk beneath the towering ceremonial gate leading from the Dream Temple and into the more austere wing of the palace where foreign envoys are received. The banners change here, less imperial gold and more deep greens and embroidered blues, representing distant provinces and even more distant kingdoms. You've reached the place where dreams became not just prophecy, not just politics, but diplomacy. Because dreams didn't stop at the palace walls. They traveled with silk caravans, tribute missions, and handwritten letters delivered by trembling scribes across thousands of miles. Dreams were used not just to interpret omens at home, but to negotiate abroad. Welcome to the quiet, brilliant, and sometimes ridiculous world of dream-based foreign policy. You take a seat on a polished stone bench that curves around a central column carved with images of mythical creatures, dragons from the east, lions from the west, a camel carrying scrolls through the desert. This is where envoys would sit before audience rehearsing what they were about to say, or more precisely, what they were about to dream. You see, many emissaries came to court not only with gifts and news, but with dreams, reportedly divinely inspired ones. Imagine the scene: a dusty envoy from a distant kingdom kneels before the emperor, and after offering a box of turquoise and fragrant myrrh, says, "Your Majesty, our king, dreamed of a phoenix flying east, its wings touching jade. We believe this means peace must be offered now." That's not a diplomatic report. That's a myth with a political deadline. And the emperor would listen, because turning down a gift was rude. Turning down a dream that was blasphemy. The tactic was surprisingly effective. A Persian ambassador once claimed to have dreamt of the Chinese emperor riding a lion through clouds of gold dust. The dream was shared, painted onto silk, and circulated in the court before he even arrived. When he did, the emperor welcomed him like an old friend, foretold by heaven. Whether the emperor believed it or not, hard to say. But the story worked. This tradition wasn't one-sided either. Chinese emperors also sent dreams abroad. In the Tang dynasty, one emperor dispatched a letter to a neighboring kingdom not containing political terms, but a description of a dream. He said he saw two mountain peaks bending toward each other, whispering in the wind. "Heaven has spoken," the letter concluded, "and suggests we end our border dispute." The reply came 2 weeks later, a scroll with a painting of clasped hands and a small bundle of tea. Historians still debate whether this was a coincidence or a masterful act of poetic statecraft, but either way the border quieted for a while. In some cases, dreams were used to accuse. An envoy from a minor southern kingdom once reported that his king had dreamt of a red crow eating rice from the emperor's own bowl. The symbolism was clear and inflammatory. A crow, a harbinger of bad luck, stealing food prosperity from the emperor. That was almost a declaration of war. The court debated for weeks whether the envoy had intended it as a veiled threat or simply shared an unfortunate dream. Eventually the man was sent home politely but firmly, with a gift of iron bowls, unbreakable, impossible to steal from, a message within a message. And then there were the fabricated dreams, visions designed purely for persuasion. A particularly bold official once tried to push through a trade agreement by reporting that the emperor had dreamt of a foreign ship arriving with sails shaped like butterfly wings. Surely, he said, this points to the requested fleet from the southern ports. The emperor, amused, asked, "And did the butterfly carry taxes on its wings?" The trade deal was postponed. But no punishment came. Because you can't punish a man for misinterpreting a dream, right? There's even a theory that some dreams were pre-written by committee. Yes, really. Diplomats and advisors would work together to design the perfect dream report. What symbols to include, what outcome to suggest, even what emotional tone the dreamer felt. Grief that resolved into peace was a favorite. So was clouds parting to reveal a path. The more poetic, the better. You glance around the courtyard and spot a recessed wall filled with painted tiles, each one depicting a historical dream exchanged between kingdoms. A lion with a crown of rice stalks, a fish leaping into a boat with no sail, a mountain bowing to a tree. These weren't just decorative. They were records of moments when imagination served as diplomacy. Because sometimes words failed, treaties broke, alliances frayed. But a dream was harder to argue with and easier to remember. Some emperors even requested dreams from visiting emissaries. Before we speak, one emperor reportedly said to a Central Asian envoy, "Tell me what heaven has shown you." It was a test, not of loyalty, but of narrative skill. Because if you couldn't dream diplomatically, you weren't ready to negotiate. You step now into a room called the Hall of Whispers, a library of dream exchanges, each one carefully preserved in multilingual scrolls: Sanskrit, Arabic, Mongolian, Tibetan, classical Chinese. The dreams vary wildly. Some are poetic and peaceful, others terrifying. But they all have one thing in common. They served a purpose, not just as dreams, but as political instruments. One inscription reads, "A dream told across borders can build what 10 armies cannot." And that's the truth of it. While generals planned campaigns and ministers debated tax law, the palace also invested in dreams. Stories carried like sacred smoke through open doors, sometimes false, sometimes true, always influential. And you wonder now, were they really dreams? Or were they just the softest language of power you've walked through, the mysticism and grandeur, the paranoia and poetry? You've witnessed how dreams served as omens, as politics, as diplomacy. But now you enter a quieter part of the palace, where the scrolls grow sparse and the windows stretch wide. This is where the dream bureaucracy began to unravel. You stand beneath a weathered arch, carved with moonflowers and plum branches, symbols of endurance. The air smells older here, tinged with dust and rain. These are the final centuries of dream administration, when a slow, skeptical wind began blowing through the empire. It didn't happen all at once. No decree was passed that said, "We no longer believe in dreams." No dramatic bonfire of scrolls. Instead, it was more like a long exhale, a gradual loss of faith, a turning away from the stars and toward numbers, from silk scrolls to printed calendars, from visions to verifiability. The bureaucrats, once trained in dream symbology and celestial signs, were slowly replaced by men who knew land management, tax reform, engineering, and perhaps most tellingly, mathematics. Dream interpretation didn't vanish overnight, but it became quaint, less influential, less urgent. One archive from the early Qing dynasty reveals the shift in tone, where older scrolls are reverent and metaphor-rich. The later ones are clinical. His Majesty dreamt of a bird with 2 heads. Recorder notes possibly triggered by poor digestion or the sight of twin mandarins during last meal. The romance of the dream had become a footnote. You walk into the old Bureau of Omens, now mostly storage, and find shelves sagging with abandoned tools, incense burners, star charts, a stack of faded dream dictionaries bound with fraying cords. Dust coats the top of a jade pillow once used to encourage clarity of vision. No one has touched it in decades. It's oddly moving, because once this room pulsed with tension and awe. Ministers pacing, scribes, scrambling interpreters wringing their hands. A single dream could change the course of a reign. Now the doors creak when they open. The only sound is the wind. And yet, it wasn't cynicism that ended the dream empire. It was modernity. As printing advanced and Confucian rationalism reasserted its grip on policy, the concept of state dreams was increasingly viewed as superstition. Imperial exams focused on classical texts, not the subtleties of dragon symbolism or the color of heavenly rabbits. Scholars trained for rigor, not revelation. Science, too, played a role. With growing awareness of sleep cycles, digestion, and psychology, dreams began to be understood not as messages from heaven, but as echoes from the mind itself. The great outer cosmos turned inward. One court physician wrote in the late 17th century, "The emperor's dream should not rule the empire, but reflect it. A fevered dream says more about the body than the stars." It was a revolutionary thought. and a quiet eulogy. But let's not pretend it disappeared entirely. Even in the later dynasties, dreams still held cultural power. Emperors continued to record them, though more as curiosities than commands. And the public, they never stopped dreaming. Temples still offered dream interpretation services. Farmers still looked for signs in the clouds of their sleep, and mothers still whispered to their children that the tiger they dreamt of was a guardian, not a threat. You pause in front of one last scroll dated near the end of the Qing dynasty. It's unusually short, just 4 lines. I dreamt I was a tree alone in winter, no leaves, no roots. Still I stood. It's unsigned. Maybe it belonged to an emperor. Maybe not. But it feels like a farewell. You walk through the courtyard one last time where the stones are cracked and the moss grows unchecked. Above you, a single wind chime clinks gently in the breeze. The dream bureau is closed, the interpreters retired, but the memory of their work lingers in the stone. And historians still argue, did the dream era end because it no longer worked, or because it worked too well and frightened those who no longer believed they were worthy of the messages? The answer, as always, is unclear. Because while laws change, dynasties fall, and cabinets are emptied, one truth remains. People keep dreaming. And even without scrolls or temples or star charts, we still wonder what our minds are trying to say in the dark. You find yourself now in the last chamber, the smallest, the most still. No golden pillars, no dragon motifs. Just a single window, open to the sky and the rustle of leaves outside. This is where the final dream scrolls were placed, the ones that didn't need interpreting. That simply existed because after centuries of sleep, studied like scripture and dreams, dissected like political speeches, there was finally a shift, a quiet return to something simpler, the dream as dream. You sit on a wooden bench worn smooth by generations of thoughtful pause. The sunlight here is soft, filtered through gauze curtains that drift with the breeze. And in your hands, one last dream record, unofficial, unsealed, unsigned. It reads, "A child walks into a silent field. The trees bow to her. She holds nothing, says nothing, but the birds follow. There is no royal seal, no astrologer's annotation, no call to action, just stillness." This final section of the palace once housed the lowest-ranking scribes, the ones who copied dream reports, not for policy but for preservation. They had no power, no influence, but they knew somehow that what passed through the sleeping mind still mattered, even without armies, even without decrees. You pace slowly along the room's perimeter, where the walls are lined with drawers, each labeled with a single word: loss, rain, river, child, bird, home. Open one and you might find a dozen dreams about flying. Another collection of people who dreamed of speaking languages they didn't know. None of them caused wars, none shaped foreign policy, but they were preserved all the same. Because someone believed that the emotional logic of a dream was as valid as any political one. And isn't that what dreams are? Fragments of memory and fear, hope and hunger? Not symbols to be decoded, but windows into the places we're too careful to speak about when awake. In these last centuries of the dream record, we find fewer grand metaphors and more quiet truths. One dream scroll reads, "I was a stone resting at the bottom of a pond. The sun never touched me, but I felt its warmth anyway." Another, "I searched the palace for a door that did not exist. I woke smiling." These are not omens, they're reflections. And though the empire no longer built temples for dreaming or hired interpreters for each vision, the people still dreamed. Peasants, poets, soldiers, each holding on to their night wanderings like a lantern held in cupped hands. Dreams became personal again, and that in some way made them more powerful. You look out the window. Beyond the palace lies the world, vast, unpredictable, full of noise. But here in this final space, you're reminded that dreams were never just about rulers or rituals. They were about the human need to make meaning, to speak to ourselves in images when words fail, to rehearse grief safely, to glimpse joy fleetingly, to build in the fragile hours between dusk and dawn, a version of truth that fits in silence. One final scroll catches your eye. It has no text, just an ink painting of a sleeping figure beneath a tree. Above the figure, a dragon circles the sky. But the dragon isn't roaring or threatening. It's resting too. You close the scroll, and you understand now why ancient Chinese emperors hired dream interpreters. Not because they had to, but because they were human, afraid, hopeful, unsure. Just like you. And maybe like them, you've started to sense that dreams aren't just nonsense to be dismissed. They are messages. Yes, sometimes muddled, sometimes mundane, sometimes terrifying, but always worth listening to. Because in a world built on certainty and strategy, dreams remind us that mystery still matters. They remind us we are more than our plans, and that maybe, just maybe, the parts of ourselves we ignore when awake are the very parts trying to lead us somewhere gently, quietly, while the world sleeps. So now, as our journey draws to a close, I invite you to take one last breath in this world where emperors wandered through visions and nations negotiated through sleep. Let your shoulders relax. Feel the weight of the stories settle like soft dust upon the windowsill. No more flames licking scrolls. No more whispering monks. Just stillness. Just you. Inhale slowly. Exhale slower. You've walked through centuries tonight, through incense clouds and moonlit corridors, through temples and courtyards and dreams carved into bamboo, and yet somehow you haven't moved at all. That's the beauty of stories like these. They unfold quietly, like petals in darkness without the need for motion. Perhaps you too have your own scrolls tucked away somewhere forgotten. Dreams, unspoken symbols, flashes of strangeness from sleep that never quite made sense, and maybe now you'll look at them differently, not as puzzles, but as mirrors, or doorways, or gentle warnings from the self you meet only when your eyes are closed. Let the quiet in now. Feel the rhythm of your breath deepen, let your body soften. The palace has faded into the mist. The scrolls have all been rolled up. The dream interpreters have gone home. And outside somewhere, another emperor turns beneath his silk sheets, chasing shadows in his sleep. But you are safe. The night is long, the story has ended, and your dreams, whatever shape they take, are waiting for you. Sleep well, and may the phoenix find you in peace.